Bonnen for that commitment. My concern is that the cities and local governments will not be hamstrung, and that's my commitment to the cities and the counties that I will be watching out for that in committee. With that, I want to hand it to Trey.
Okay, thank you, Eddie. My name is Trey Martinez Fischer. Some of you know me. This is my fourth term on Ways and Means, and the one rule that I always remembered when I first took a seat on Ways and Means was that very special passage in the Texas Constitution that says tax bills originate in the House. And there's a good reason for that. And that reason is because the members of the House are the closest to the ground of our constituents, our mayors, our county judges, our school board superintendents, trustees, and most importantly, our taxpayers. I agree with my colleague. You heard from the Big Three today that they are going to move forward on a joint proposal filed in both chambers calling for a 2.5% cap on taxes and now include school taxes for property taxes. But what you didn't hear, and I want to be very clear on this, and I do want to give Speaker Bonnen that same credit and deference. Senator Bettencourt and Lieutenant Governor Patrick said, this is our plan, these are the parameters, and we have a hearing next week. Chairman Burrows, the chairman that we serve with on Ways and Means, said, this is House Bill 2, and there will be 149 members at the table. Those weren't casual conversations. Those words have real meaning. Just like Speaker Bonnen has made it very clear, it is not his job to come up with a policy. It's his job to set the tone and set the priorities, and it's up to this House to work its will to arrive at a solution. So let's just talk about that briefly. There is not a lot of difference, not a lot of daylight between House Bill 2 and House Bill 1 that was filed in the special session of 2017. In many instances and on many pages, where it used to say 6%, it says 2.5%. Now there's some talk about bringing school districts into the equation. Many unanswered questions with regard to that. Here's the very first one. How much is that going to cost? When you put these items together and you think about this in the larger context of the governor's school finance proposal that includes tax reform, I believe the representations of the School Finance Commission was that the state would absorb those costs that would exceed the amount of money that school districts could raise on a 2.5% cap. Those of you paying attention during those School Finance Commission hearings knows that TEA costed that for 2020 and 2021 at $3 billion. And so are we now looking at this as a much larger piece in a school finance package that's going to add $3 billion to the cost of this tax proposal? It is unclear as to whether or not the state will even live up to that commitment because it's not embedded in the filed version of House Bill 2. So I think for anybody paying attention to this, anybody reading or watching the news this weekend, I think the very first question that they should arrive at is that this raises more questions than it does answers. I have said this in the 16 years I've been in this House. We do our worst work when we work under deadlines, especially artificial deadlines. The House will not be fooled. The House Committee on Ways and Means will not be fooled by any attempt by any chamber to send us a legislative packet that doesn't receive the thorough consideration and vetting, beginning with the Ways and Means Committee of the Texas House and the 149 members that Chairman Burrows is committed to that would touch this proposal. What does that mean for someone like me from the city of San Antonio, one of the largest cities in the state? If you looked at the rollback to 6% in the special session, when that was priced for cities and counties across the state, I believe the cost was very close to $55 million for cities and about $65 million for counties. In the city of San Antonio, when you roll out a tax freeze proposal at 2.5% of city taxes, over the course of 10 years, this is a $300 million hit to the City of San Antonio's General Revenue Fund. If you look at a one-year cost for a 2.5 cap on city taxes, it's a loss of $80 million. And here's why that matters. They're not just numbers. The City of San Antonio spends 2/3, 66% of the City of San Antonio's budget is spent on first responders, our men and women in uniform, firefighters, police officers, code officers. But yet the city taxes that they levy only make up 1/3 of the budget. Make no mistake, a 2.5% cap would limit and practically prohibit my city from having a strong law enforcement presence in our communities, keeping us safe, doing some of the other things that folks around here are requiring our city police officers to do these days that I don't agree with. What's the implications on SB 4 when you tie law enforcement's hands on a 2.5% cap? And so I didn't say this earlier, but when I say to you that tax bills originate in the House, under this Speaker and under this leadership, I'm very thankful for that. I'm very thankful for the fact that we will all have an opportunity to participate. Chairman Bonnen is no stranger to the details of tax policy. He was my chairman on Ways and Means when I served last in 2015. He understands that we all have constituents. He understands that we all have mayors. And he understands that we all pay taxes too. And so our value, our input will be a part of this process. And I also heard Speaker Bonnen say very clearly that the House and the Senate, or the Speaker, the Lieutenant Governor, and the Governor will not be divided. I agree with that, and I respect that. But I will also tell you that the House will not be divided either. And we will not have our positions represented by anybody, any place, any time, because they feel the need to have a hearing with less than 1 week's notice. And for those of you out there in the world of asking questions, I would be surprised, in fact, I would be shocked if the comptroller already has this proposal priced. I'm sure that is the question of the day. What does the comptroller have to say about this? Is this proposal new? Where is the work product? And when did that work product begin? Because I venture to say something that comes this fast and this quick, and, well, certainly, I hope there's a paper trail behind it to show that the work has been done. And so I'm ready to roll up my sleeves. I have made a commitment to the people that I represent that there is nothing more important in making sure that we leave this session with a responsible school finance plan that is going to tell the state to do its part and to do its share in sharing in that burden and that opportunity to educate young minds in Texas classrooms. I also want to make sure that we are sitting at that table having a responsible, level, and measured conversation about the consequences of putting any kind of cap. And I will leave you this, pass it back to Representative Rodriguez or go to questions. The only thing that has changed from the special session of 2017 and a tax proposal at 6% and today's proposal at 2.5% is there are 12 more Democrats in the Texas House that have something to say about that. And we will certainly do that at the time. So, we understand State of the State is next week. We understand this is the time of the year where big priorities are coming out. Many of the questions that happened today at the governor's press conference, the first half of them were pertaining to Secretary of State's voter data and whether or not there was a mistake made in false data being transferred to counties. I also know that this is probably something that we're going to hear about in the State of the State. And I want the governor to know in advance that we're willing to roll up our sleeves and work with his office as we've committed to on a number of subjects. This is no different. But I want to be very, very clear and very, very precise that when we go back home, we have to look our constituents in the eye and let them know that we were there for them to do our best work. And that's exactly what's going to happen. And unfortunately, it won't happen by next Wednesday. And so I will lay that marker out there right now. I hope and look forward to the Ways and Means Committee convening for the first time, as we've yet to do that. And I imagine we have a number of things to do to be briefed up and to have all the information we need on the state of our revenues and our opportunities for us to provide the relief to the constituents that elected us to come up here and do a good job. So with that, I'll pass it back to Eddie, and when Eddie's done, we'll go to questions.
I just wanted to remind you all, if you don't remember, last session, the House was looking at 6% as the cap. I think starting at 2.5 is a non-starter. I trust that the Speaker is going to give us, all 149 other members, Democrat and Republican, the opportunity to look at that number. It's hard for me to see, as Trey mentioned, with 12 new Democrats in here, it was hard to get 6, and starting at 2.5, it seems like a pretty uphill battle. The other thing is, Speaker Bonnen had mentioned in his acceptance speech, and actually all the big three have mentioned that school finance is the top priority, not one of the top priorities, the top priority. I don't see how we can look at a bill like this without understanding what school finance reform is going to look like, right? Until we see that, we'll understand the impact that this bill really will have on our local governments. So I think until we really have an idea of what the school finance bill is going to look like, really serious discussions about this revenue cap really, I think, should slow down minimally. And we'll just open it up for questions.
Do you fundamentally support a cap, though? I mean, is there a cap you guys would agree to?
Well, I'll say this. What I fundamentally believe in is that I'm not quite convinced that the status quo is not working. I think that there are a number of things. Tax policy is nuanced, as you know. And there's one way you can fix it by changing numbers, and there's another way you can fix things by changing methodologies. And I think that there's another way you can fix it by making sure that there's transparency in that process. And so I think you put all of those on the table, and let's find what works. But yet to set an arbitrary number without doing any due diligence, without looking at those, what we call the unintended consequences, without being measured and responsible in that regard, I think that I'm going to refrain from committing to anything until I'm convinced that there's something that we need to be concerned about. But I will say, however, we do hear ad nauseum about an appraisal system that might be arbitrary and not, done with some sort of objectivity. I hear complaints about not knowing where to go when you want to contest your property taxes or who's raising those taxes. This House has sent unanimous proposals to fix things up with transparency. I think we can have a responsible discussion on appraisal process as well. But I am not willing to say that the end solution to these problems is just to change the number, because I think that's sort of what happened today, and I will be deferential, and I will just agree to disagree with the way we're starting. But as my colleague mentioned, we didn't get very far at 6%. I don't see us getting any further at 2.5%.
Lieutenant Governor said today that these were the parameters that they're setting and that we can work from here as a group together. Is that what you plan to do, or do House Democrats plan to file a bill of their own that would be something completely different, or are you working on House bill and Senate bill 2 to make it better?
Well, I am planning on filing a bill that I think will have meaningful property tax relief for Texas homeowners. I'm not prepared to talk about the specifics of that right now, but I am working on something. As far as the caucus, I can't speak to say if the caucus as a whole will be having a bill. But look, I have homeowners in my district. Austin, Texas is one of the most expensive places to live. I understand the need for a lot of homeowners to feel some form of relief. So I'm committed to that. I understand the reality of that. But it needs to be meaningful, it needs to be long-lasting, and it can't just be arbitrary. And 2.5 to me seems a bit arbitrary, but we'll look into it. The previous question, if I may, I don't necessarily categorically say I have a problem with caps, but I do. The devil is in the details. We have to see what that's going to look like. If there are exceptions, if there's protections for law enforcement and for firefighters and public safety, for example, maybe we can work through that. But the devil is definitely in the details when it comes to that.
And to your point, look, I mean, when you leave this briefing today, you're going to compete for an elevator space with, folks moving furniture into members' offices. I mean, there are many members that are just now getting their pens and papers and getting, equipped to work. When you have a bill that has a House Bill number 2, when you have a low number like that, you have a tendency to get these proposals back pretty quick. But as Eddie is mentioning, yes, there are alternative proposals being worked on right now, and I think that in a knee-jerk reactionary world, the easy thing would be to take this bill and strike out 2.5% and put another number there and say, okay, well, let's go from there. It's only going to take us back to the same place as where we were in disagreement at a 4% and a 6% proposal. What I believe is that we need to start rolling up our sleeves and start talking about this, but to lower a number to a discussion and a debate where there was disagreement is not productive to the conversation. So 2.5% is not responsible, just like 10% is probably not responsible either. And so we will get the parameters of our working group and our committee. But we would definitely want to make we want to make a statement in the very early press cycle of this narrative that Democrats are not acquiescing to this plan. At least this Democrat's not, right? And I've been on Ways and Means a number of years, and I think that I'll have value added to the conversation with like-minded Democrats in the caucus. This has serious unintended consequences. We don't know what it costs yet. I want to hear from the controller. I want to hear from the OBB. I want to know what happens to expenses at school districts if we cap them at 2.5%. Who's going to pay for them? And I also want to prioritize the priorities. Everybody I talked to said we're going to put every available dollar that we have in schools. And when we're done with that, we're going to tackle taxes to make sure that folks aren't being taxed out of their homes. But we don't want superintendents and school boards and children capped out of their education. And I think the two go hand in hand. And we need to start having meaningful conversations and not press conferences.
So they're Bill Quigley, though, I've been in conversations with my school districts, and they're just combing through this, trying to figure out how this may impact them. They don't quite know yet. That's why I'm saying school finance, if it is the top priority, it needs to be the number 2 bill, right? We got to figure that thing out. And we all know that the property taxes that homeowners pay and other taxpayers pay, the bulk of that is the school property tax. So we need, if we're going to tackle that and lower that rate and that amount, that's when people are going to really truly see property tax relief.
I think a lot of us are trying to figure out what these events say politically. I mean, obviously, we walked in this morning and you already had your statement out, and I assume you had seen the bill. And can you give us a little more backstory of how you came into this and who's talked to whom at what point?
Yeah, you're gonna kill me, but I'm not gonna tell you a lie. I mean, I found out about this proposal on Twitter. I saw an advisory from the governor's office that the big three were going to meet together this morning. When I learned that Senator Bettencourt and Chairman Burrows were going to be there, I knew they weren't going to be talking about agriculture and livestock. And so I called my colleague on the committee. We rolled up our sleeves, put a pot of coffee on. We started asking questions, and by the time we went to bed at night, we knew what was happening, and we knew that we had to be here to provide a meaningful response. So like you, we're a little bit surprised by it, but I want to be very clear that the leadership of the House reached out and talked to us by yesterday evening to tell us a few things. The first one being, we're going to sit down and work on this. We all are at the table. This is no different than anything we're going to tackle this session. And because I have served with Speaker Bonnen, because I have served on committees with him, I know what that means. And so that's why I want to be very clear that I fully defer to the unity of the Lieutenant Governor, the Speaker, and the Governor when it comes to their priorities. I 100% agree with the Speaker when he says it's up to us to come up with a plan. And that's what we're going to do.
So you don't think Speaker Biden's going to try to keep you to that 2.5%?
I have learned never to guess what Speaker Bonnen is going to do. I have learned to listen to his words, and I have learned to look him in the eye in the face of very controversial circumstances. And when he tells me that all members of the House are going to be at the table, I take him at his word.
Speaker Bonnen is a man of his word. He's talked to a lot of us individually. He truly believes that the body needs to create policy. He's not going to try to dictate what it needs to be. And I have to take him at his word. I've served with Dennis Bonnen now for 16 years, and he's never lied to me once. And when he says that we're all going to be a part of this, we're all going to be a part of this, and I believe him. And I think that Dennis is one of the smartest guys I know in the House. He knows that 2.5 is way off from 6 where we were last session. So I think he knows that. He understands that. He knows that Trey and I are going to work in the committee to try to represent a different point of view, perhaps a Democratic point of view or a more fair point of view, I think. So we know that he's going to work with us and work with every member Democrat or Republican.
And I think the larger point is this. I think that I didn't attend the press conference. I watched it on a live stream. It seems to me that the Senate has already figured out what they want to do. I heard very clearly from the House that it's up to the members to come up with a solution. And I know that means we have a lot of hard work before us. And I also know that means this isn't done.
Y'all expect voter ID law legislation to derail any of the important work that needs to be done?
Well, if I can real quick, I mean, looking what the Secretary of State is doing right now, and I'm policy chair of the Mexican-American Legislative Caucus, and we have a committee that we're working on that very issue. I would not be surprised if some kind of voter disenfranchisement bills will be out there, whether it derails us. Look, many of us have done this for a long time. Bills like that are not foreign to us. We understand the priorities of the state. Voter ID is not the priority of the state. Speaker Bonnen, we even have cups in the members' lounge that say, school finance, if not now, when. I mean, that's important for the speaker. This bill apparently is important to the speaker. I don't think bills like that are gonna get far in this session.
I'm not the policy chair of the Mexican-American Caucus, but I'm the policy chair of the Zarzamora Street Caucus in west side of San Antonio. And listen, everybody in this room either knows firsthand or has heard very clearly about the division and the acrimony of the 2017 session. The math of the chamber has changed. Passing legislation most of the time is a game of math. The Speaker has laid out some very tall and very robust priorities, and to accomplish those priorities, the House cannot and should not get divided on some of the smaller things that only have a tendency to divide the House. It is my job as a senior member of the Democratic Caucus, as Chairman Rodriguez's job as a senior member of the Democratic Caucus, to make sure that we are going to hold the line on the vitriol and all the rhetoric. And I've said this all the time, we can pass these priorities, and if we do it in 120 days, we can lock the door for the remaining 20 days and fight all night. I'm good with that. But let's get the people's work done first and foremost. School finance is a very tall mountain to climb. You layer on top of that a tax reform proposal. You layer on top of that 27 million Texans who rely on their mayors and council members and commissioners to pave their potholes, to keep stray animals off the street, to provide a basic level of health care for folks who aren't getting it. You layer that on top of that, there is enough dynamite in the wagon already. We should refrain from putting more sticks in the wagon and get this work done. And but that is a responsibility that's on the body, and I've made it my commitment to see that I will work very hard to make sure that the House sticks to the issues at hand and the priorities at hand, and not fight over the things that divide us.
Do you think that since the bill exempts small taxing entities, it will set up a fight between rural and urban lawmakers?
Well, last session that was a divisive kind of issue. Some of the more urban members and suburban members were saying, look, if it's good enough for us, why isn't it good enough for them? And you do have that fight. It remains to be seen. If it was an issue last session, I'm not sure why it wouldn't be an issue this session. Let's just see what the bill looks like.
So it's a very good question. I'm glad you asked it. This tax policy is no different than school finance policy. And, while all the work and negotiation and all the changing of this proposal as it goes through its process, in school finance, we get runs. And we know, does the school finance proposal, how much more money it takes into our school districts, how much money it takes out? Well, in this tax policy, I want to know the carve-outs. I want to know, when you look at this tax policy from one Senate district, what are the runs for the Senate district, and how are they different from a smaller House district? And so you are asking a very, very good question that I would encourage many folks in your industry to go pursue. Are there going to be carve-outs? Are there going to be smaller jurisdictions that are not going to be touched by the proposal? And are we just going to go after the big cities? It's a very good question.
And if you look at, if I may, if you look at the larger counties that are going to be probably impacted more by this, that's where a lot more minorities, Latino, African Americans, lower income people tend to live. The carve out for the smaller counties, they look very different. So, that's not lost on me, and it's not lost on a lot of members too. So I think it's important for y'all to look into that as well.
And it's, again, another reason why you don't rush to a hearing as early as next Wednesday and at least send signals that you're ready to move this, to the Senate floor. There's no hurry in this. I'm glad we're working on it early, but make no mistake, this is nothing but an artificial deadline to work on something that's going to take a lot of work that couldn't get accomplished in a special session and a regular session before that. We need to be very mindful of where we are, how hard this is, and how much work we have to do to even get to a place where we're in the same solar system. I think we're good. If you're good, if you have one-on-ones, just find us. If you have any follow-up, our staff contacts are on the advisory. Thank you for coming. Have a good weekend.